Another thing I was fascinated with this particular piece was the shadows.
Okay, so before actually I want to talk about the dancing, I want to talk a little bit about the worlds that you create for the dances. I was thinking about your sort of interest in the design, the visual design, as much as the physical design, and looking back to an Inside Out performance you did here in 2003, where that beautiful light-colored stage, you put pink fabric on, and it changed the way the dancers looked, and that's a huge space to change the way it appears. I mean, that's nature. Tonight we see with the pieces of aluminum and in the lighting. Could you just talk a little bit about why you want to create different worlds for the dances to be in?
I mean, I think the first thing I'm thinking of for your question is I don't necessarily see the dance like creating a world for the dance to be in. It seems like the world is the dance. Mm-hmm. So for me, the set environment and kind of spatial design is part of what's going on in the dance. So the components of the visual design are conceptually emphasizing what's going on in the dance. So I find them very integrated. So for me, it's all about an exaggeration or an amplification of something, of a spatial or almost like a warping time and space, so that we see something maybe that we see every day, but it's kind of dissected and expanded in a way that's unusual, so we can see it in a new way. So for me, the idea of exaggerating the components of the dance through scale and size and color helps. So I think it's kind of stemming from that idea.
So with Big City, the first piece on the program, did you start doing a physical exploration and then think, how can I amp up this idea?
Exactly.
And then went to the hardware store with
exactly.
Philip Trevino?
Exactly, Home Depot was our place to start. And it's been really fun to collaborate with a very talented and in many ways genius Philip Trevino, who does all of our lighting design for the show you just saw, and collaborated with me on the set for Big City, the first piece. It was my second of 3 set collaborations with Philip. We're in the process of another one that'll go up this fall at BAM. But we start at coffee shops, and we start talking about the conceptual designs and explorations I'm doing in the studio with the dancers. So in Big City, the case was construction and deconstruction. So I was taking the elements of dance and simply looking at accumulation and decumulation and taking fractures of movement and then multiplying them and building dance and thinking about building time and building space. So through our coffee shop conversation, we sketched out visual designs as we were talking about construction and building, and it kept coming to this idea of verticality, and we started thinking about building and scale, and everything became vertical, and through the conversations we came up with these very minimal kind of silhouette-looking drawings of just verticality. So it was interesting. It kind of worked in this way of refining the idea to its simplest form. So then we saw the design as being just all these vertical lines, and then we thought, perfect, how do we build it? Yeah. So then we started sourcing materials, and we went through a lot of materials. The aluminum just struck us as quite elegant.
And that adds such a beautiful, other kind of worldly with the light coming on it as well.
Transformative.
So in Descent, you don't have a set per se in the same kind of way, but you use the light in a really sculptural way.
It sounds so silly. It was kind of we did a piece right before Descent that had a set through the whole theater, and touring it was wonderful, but had its challenges. So we said, why don't we just do that tights and lights thing? And we did the design, he did the lighting design for Descent, which has like 40 different gobos that have to be focused, so it turned out to be just as difficult as the piece with all the metal, and we thought, we're never going to do it, but it was basically about creating volume of space. I mean, we often are looking at trying to create a very full, visceral, kinesthetic experience in a theater and thinking of the frame and not just using the dancers are bound to the ground, so our space is limited to, I'm 5'8" and a quarter and my arms go a little higher, but it's just only so much space.
Right.
So we try to use the lights and maximize the volume of the theater.
Part of the pleasure about your use of the set pieces is that you don't try to hide how it happens. Like we see those dancers frantically fanning
Sure.
to keep the fabric in the air. We see them building the set pieces, and sort of with these fishing lines that come down. Why not hide behind? Like part of the artifice of theater is the artifice of theater, but then you've given us this way of letting us see the mechanics of it.
Sure. I'm so happy you say that. It's really the point. So I think we try it to different degrees with more or less success with each piece, but I keep going at it. I think seeing the human effort in that way and the deconstruction of things. I think if you see us go from nothing to something great, the journey can be so profound. So to see the dancer manipulate something that then, like the fabric idea, you see it and it seems so silly and simple, but then hopefully because you're seeing the mechanics, it allows you to let your imagination go further. If it was all illusion, I think it doesn't go the distance for us as much. So I'm thinking about that.
What's sort of the contrast between like the labor that makes something happen and then the thing that happens, and it feels like that's the dance world in a certain way. You've got it.
Oh, absolutely,
Yeah,
right?
yeah.
Yeah, we are the work. It's, yeah.
I want to turn now to the dancing itself, and if you could talk about in Big City compared with Descent, and these two really different ideas of partnering that you have. And in Big City, the opening piece, it's much more collaborative. People are giving and taking, and it's got a sense of sharing. And then in Descent, it's almost unyielding, like that from that opening image of a person who looks kind of unliftable. Could you just talk about how you came to those explorations and then how they produce sort of different meaning for you as a choreographer?
I made Descent first. I wonder if that affects, the process and what leads us to the next thing. Descent for me, I think the first thing we got was the opening of the piece. We call it privately, the first section, carry, where they're carried in a slightly 45-degree angle to the floor. And it just really summed it up for me very quickly, and I think that's when I thought, let's make a new piece. It was the suspension of the person, and with all of them sustained, it was quite, it changed time for me a bit, right? So it elongated force, and I'm quite manic, and a lot of my choreography is quite micromanaged. So I like, they know. I'm sorry. I'm sorry for that. But I'm fascinated with quick fire, and so the hummingbird fascinates me, the wing. I study the wing of the hummingbird. It's a fascinating thing. So for me to slow down and catch a frame of the hummingbird and then stretch it out and look at it for a long time and really study that under the microscope is a rare occurrence for me. So it was a big deal when we found that.
Visually, yeah, but no easier on your dancers, right?
No, if it's easy, the dancers know I won't do it. They figured, and they teach the new dancers and they're like, oh yeah, let's do that, that's easy. And they're like, shh. He's gonna cut it. But that's terrible. But that moment of seeing the force and collision, but in a sustained way, I thought was very beautiful. And so we studied that idea of kind of playing with elongating the force and slowing it and warping it. So it was really about usually interrupting a fall in Descent. It's usually
which we see in the men's duet with Evan and
Brian,
the other Brian.
The other Brian.
That so much of that is about Brian sort of letting the weight of Evan drive it in a certain way.
He's kind of redirecting. Evan's in a constant state of fall, perpetual kind of tip. So we studied everything through a lot of improvisation, and it's meticulously set, but we really tried to set it off of the the actual fall and physics and rebound and redirection of what Evan was doing, so he could be as passive as possible and Brian could be as active as possible. So I really tried to take those two ideas and put them on display throughout Descent. And then the fabric is another study of that idea, extremely active and extremely passive. And then the final section too kind of plays with throwing it around in a complicated way. But I mean, it said a lot metaphorically for me too, without having to create a lot of character. So I was very excited to try and find the humanity through something for me that's very structural. So with Big City, it was the idea really, I mean, I think the body for me became the terrain for the other dancers. So as we started figuring out what are we building, and I kept getting lost in outer space. So I found the building of the body and the other bodies becoming ground and terrain and mountain and surface and support for the other dancer. But Big City is very collaborative and cooperative, and it's all about kind of passing that idea of support back and forth. So Descent, we were very clear about the magnet. You know, it's very polarized from one dancer to another, or one piece of foam core to a piece of chiffon. But the Big City is really passed quickly. So it's often like a wave or...
We see that especially in that big section with the 6 dancers,
Yeah,
where it just
sure.
is going on and on, and ongoing sort of back and forth of lift, not lift, or
Right.
lift and carry. Motor, so unadorned. I mean, really, you've just pared it way down. And I saw that piece at a preview, even before it was at Lincoln Center several years ago, and it's so lodged in my mind, that section in particular. How did you trust that you had enough? Like, it's really a very simple idea, and it's mesmerizing and hypnotic and virtuosic on the part of you and Brian. But I mean, I think it's risky.
Yeah, every second. I mean, 3 years later, it's still every second is a risk. It feels like walking a tightrope. You know, you can do it a million times, but every time you're still on the tightrope. So it's quite a thrill. It's one of my favorite things I've done in my whole life. Wow, that's cool. Although I wouldn't recommend it for everyone.
A little marathon training, it's good for you. Right?
Yeah, but I mean, I think a lot about making everything about nothing. You know, making a really big deal about something very small, right? So I think that piece did that very clearly. But it's amazing the complexity you can find in one simple thing. I mean, sometimes I feel like it's too much. I notice, I think it's fairly unembellished, but even with that, I'm very sensitive to, like, you know, we talk about the pinky and we talk about the focus. I mean, you get into the very, very tiny details, but I think that's very beautiful.